Hey there, welcome to another episode of Board Gems. This is my weekly video series in which I talk about an older game, and I talk it up a bit. A game that I think is good and is still good, and we should all still be playing and not get too caught up in the cult of the new. The last few games I've been doing haven't been that old, maybe like 10 years old. The next couple weeks are going to be similar because this week and next week I got a couple of vaguely spooky games, Halloween-themed games lined up. But after that, you'll see some old stuff, much older stuff. So this week I'm covering a game from 2009, and it was originally published in Germany as Fluch der Mumie, which was released in some English language markets as Pyramid. My understanding, from what I could gather, is that this actually wasn't printed a whole lot in English. Ravensburger, what they sometimes do is when they have a German game, they'll also publish an English edition, but they won't necessarily print too many English copies, and they'll focus all their English copies on one particular market, like Canada, or United States, or UK, or Australasia, and see how well it does there. And if it does well, then maybe they'll print more and release it in other markets, but they kind of do test runs. This one, I think, was that example. I know for a fact the English edition was available in Australia at least, maybe presumably New Zealand also, but I don't know if it ever came out in English in North America. If it did, only in very limited quantities. So I ended up getting a German edition. Now, like I said, it was published in 2009. Several years later, a Chinese version came out called Gangsi, and shortly after that, Brain Games published it as Pyramid of Pengqueen. Pengqueen. It plays exactly the same way, except you'll see like this one is a mummy in a pyramid, kind of that classical style. And this one was redone because Brain Games is the publisher of Ice Cool, so they're trying to set it within the Ice Cool universe, I suppose, have a little tie-in there. But they play exactly the same way, and component-wise, they're basically the same. It's for 2 to 5 players, ages 8 and up, and takes about 40 minutes to play. I'd say that's probably pretty fair. Now, the unique thing about this game, and which you'll see in the how to play part, is that it has a vertical board, which is magnetic. It's a one versus many game. One player plays as the mummy, and their goal is to catch the other players a certain number of times. It doesn't matter whom, but they need to catch people a certain number of times. And the other players are trying to, basically, they have a shopping list, basically, of all the artifacts they're trying to find in the pyramid. And one player of those will win if they finish their shopping list, if they get all 4 or 5 items on their shopping list. It's unique, it's very special because that vertical board separates the mummy player with the other players. And whereas the other players can see where the mummy is, the mummy can't see where the other players are. So the mummy's kind of walking around a little bit blindly, but the mummy does have some information. Like the mummy can see which artifacts have already been found by which players, and so they can kind of say, well, I think, most of these players haven't gotten the blue artifact yet, so I'm going to hang around the blue area. And it's a really cool magnetic feature, so as the mummy moves, the mummy player moves the mummy pawn on their side of the vertical board, another matching piece on the opposite side moves, so the other players can see where the mummy is going. And if the mummy manages to enter the same space as another player, it catches. The magnet catches, and you hear this very satisfying snap. The mummy player goes, gotcha. Really charming game, and a little bit thematic with Halloween coming up, because it really captures the sort of, kind of the movie monster kind of vibe where, you're trying to stay away, you're trying to get somewhere, but you don't want to be caught, so you kind of stay out of sight and hope the mummy doesn't see you. I'll show you how it plays first. Watch that. Then I'll talk more about why it's a gem. To set up the game, first decide which player is going to be the mummy. If you can't decide, I would recommend the oldest player, the player who's most mummy-like. The mummy player alone will sit on one side of the board, and all the other players, the treasure hunters or tomb raiders, are going to sit on the other side of the board. The mummy player is going to get this black die on their side, and they're going to get the two mummy pieces right here. There's a little one and then there's this big one. The big one goes on the mummy side. I should point out the sides are identical. The artwork is slightly different. For the treasure hunters, there's a little staircase that goes up into the entrance, and for the mummy, there's kind of an open sarcophagus there. But otherwise, they're identical. They're mirror images of each other. So you're going to take the little piece, and you're going to put it on the treasure hunter's side of the sarcophagus, and the big pawn you're going to place on the other side. Like that. And in this way, the mummy is able to move. You can see the mummy piece moving along there. The other players are the tomb raiders. Each player gets a little magnet, which goes into the entrance there. I'm going to set this up for a 4-player game, so there's 3 treasure hunters. And each player gets 3 life tokens, which in this game are represented by these torches. And as a group, the treasure hunters also get these 5 light-colored dice. They're numbered 1 to 4. There's an arrow somewhere there, and there's a mummy symbol, which in this game is that. It looks like a little mask or something. There's 5 decks of cards of different colors, ranging in number between 4 and 5. Each card in the game represents one of the artifacts. So you'll see there's 5 yellow artifacts, and there's 5 yellow cards, one card representing each of the 5 yellow artifacts. So there's yellow, purple, red, gray, and green. So you're going to shuffle up each deck of colored cards and give each player 1. So in the end, they're going to have a hand of 5 cards, 1 of every color. And they're going to keep this secret. They're just going to keep their hand with them like that. Now, this is a competitive game. One player is going to win by the end. The mummy wins if they get a certain number of captures. And when a player is captured, they have to give one of their life tokens to the mummy player. And the mummy player wins if they capture a certain number of those tokens. So in a 4-player game where there's 3 treasure hunters, the mummy wins if they collect any 6 life tokens. It doesn't matter whose. If a tomb raider loses all 3 of their life tokens, they lose and are out of the game, and the other players continue. A tomb raider will win if they're able to complete their shopping list. Their shopping list of 5 artifacts. Every time they're able to get one of the artifacts, they reveal that card to all the players, including the mummy player, and put it in some place that's visible to both players, to all the players. And if they're able to give up all of their cards, because they've captured all the artifacts, they win and they win alone. So play is clockwise, but the mummy always gets the last turn. So you're going to start with the player to the left of the mummy. That player is going to take all the dice that are not locked. Now, at the beginning of the game, none of them are locked. I'm going to explain the significance of the locked dice later. But that player, the first player, let's say it's blue, is going to roll all the dice and may choose one of the results. If they choose a number, they move exactly that many spaces. However, they can backtrack. So blue could go 1, 2, 3 if they wanted to. Or they could just try to make a beeline to their first artifact, 1, 2, 3, for example, something like that. If they pick an arrow, instead, they slide along the ice in a straight direction until they hit an obstacle being either a wall or another player's piece. And it could be a treasure hunter's piece or it could be the mummy. And they don't actually land on that space, they just land right to the space before that. So they just slide until they reach a space that they can't end their turn on. So if the blue player was to choose the arrow here, the only place they could go is this space there, like so. And it's important when you're choosing a value to reveal to the mummy player what they chose. So blue in this case might say, I chose the arrow. Or they might say, I chose the 3. Either way, that's 3 spaces away from the entrance. And then it's the next player's turn. However, if they're able to end their turn on an artifact that they have the card for, let's see, which artifact is that? That's this one. They would reveal it. And they would say, okay, I've gotten this artifact, and they would place it face up in sight of all players, including the mummy player. So the mummy player knows that at that moment, that blue player is in that location. So the next player is going to go in clockwise order, and they're going to roll all dice, again, that are not locked. What does it mean to be locked? Any mummy symbol you roll is locked. It's given to the mummy player. And it's important to note, if you don't like any of these values, let's say red, who's going next, really wants a 4. If they want to, they can re-roll. They would have to re-roll all the dice. Still don't have a 4. They can roll as many times as they want. There's my 4. The only catch is that any mummy symbols that are rolled go to the mummy player. And so on for, we'll do yellow's turn. Yellow loses this die and can choose one of these results. So let's say they also choose a 4. Like so. So now all the treasure hunters, the tomb raiders, have taken a single turn. Now it's the mummy's turn. The mummy player will take the black die, which has between 1 and 3 mummy symbols. They're going to roll it. The result is 3. And to that, they're going to add 1 for every die that's locked. So they're going to move 1 space for every symbol. If this is what they rolled, they're going to be moving 5 spaces. 3 for the die they rolled, and 2 for the symbols on the dice that were locked. And they would move 5 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're on their way. They're trying to catch the players. And then it's the next player's turn in clockwise order, the next treasure hunter's turn. And it continues like that. These dice stay locked until one player, one treasure hunter player, at the start of their turn, decides they want to reset. So let's say blue doesn't want to have just 3 dice. They're going to reset. What happens is that they get these dice back, but first the mummy gets a free move. They get to move 1 space for every symbol on the locked dice. So in this case, 2. So the mummy gets a free movement of 2, let's say. And now blue is free. They can re-roll. They can roll all the dice to start their turn. If ever a player rolls dice, maybe they don't have very many dice left, and everything they get are mummy symbols, their turn immediately ends. And the next treasure hunter, because they have no dice available, they're all locked, they have to reset. And in that case, the mummy player will get a free move of 5 spaces. So as you can see, the mummy can't actually see where the other players are, where the treasure hunters are. But as the tomb raiders, as the treasure hunters collect artifacts, the mummy player gets clues. They know exactly where they are when they claim an artifact. And from there, they can also get clues because every time a player moves, they announce how many spaces they moved. Exactly. It's not up to, it has to be that full amount. But again, they can backtrack. If during a mummy's turn, and it doesn't matter if it's their normal turn or if it's their free move, because one player chose to reset, if they move into the space of another player, it catches. And as soon as that happens, the mummy player ends their turn. That player who's caught, in this case it's yellow, would have to give 1 of their life tokens to the mummy player. And again, the mummy player is going to win when they collect a certain number. At this point, mummy's turn is over. This player is caught and has to go to the sarcophagus. And on their next turn, they can move from there. So in this case, when yellow takes their next turn, they're going to start from the sarcophagus. If ever you give up your last life token, you're out of the game. And the mummy player will win if they collect a certain number of tokens. 4 tokens If it's a 3-player game, 6 tokens. In a 4-player game, and 7 tokens if you're playing with the full 5 players. And the treasure hunter wins if they collect all the artifacts in their hand. That's it. You're ready to play Pyramid of Pengqueen. So this game is really special. Like, it's really unique and novel. One versus many games have a long history, of course, and Ravensburger has a history with that too. In Scotland Yard, of course, classic Ravensburger game. And this one is obviously, it's not very, very similar to Scotland Yard, but it is one versus many. But it's reversed, right? It's like reverse Scotland Yard. Whereas in Scotland Yard, all the players are working together to try to catch the single player. Instead, it's the reverse. It's the single player is trying to catch everybody else. And the way the magnets work, you have the vertical board that's magnetic on both sides, so all the players are able to move on their side of the board, but the mummy can't see where the players are, but the players can see where the mummy is. And as the mummy moves their pawn, you hear they catch somebody to click, right? You hear that satisfying click, and the mummy player is like, oh, gotcha, right? It's very, very satisfying. Great with kids. The box says ages 8 and up. I think that's pretty fair. It's possible younger kids could play. They probably need some help. I'd probably say, like, if you're playing in a family setting, the kids could absolutely play with other family members. Just maybe not necessarily as the mummy, which is not more complicated, but, it's less forgiving of mistakes, because if a little kid makes a mistake, nobody else is going to know about it, right? So I just want to stress that I love the unique quality of this game. I don't know any other game like that. So if you are trying to have like a collection of all sorts of different unique games, so I want this game and I don't want any other game in my collection that's like it, then you can have Fluch der Mumie or Pyramid of Pengqueen and be satisfied that this is something that's special in your collection. It's just really clever, and I really love this. This part is genius to me. The whole idea of the movement and how the dice lock, because as players roll the dice, right? So they only roll the dice once, but if they don't like the options, they can roll again. The catch is that, and they can roll as many times as they want. The catch is that for every mummy they roll, the die gets locked. And a locked die benefits the mummy, because on the mummy's turn, when the mummy's turn comes around, for every locked die, they get to move an extra space. So as more dice get locked, the mummy becomes stronger, moves farther, more likely to catch someone. And at some point, some player has to bite the bullet and say, I'm going to reset all the dice. And by doing so, giving the mummy a free turn. And that mummy might catch somebody, might catch them. So if they're close to the mummy, they're like, oh my God, I only have 1 die, but I can't reset, because if I give the mummy a free turn, they might catch me. But the reverse, let's say it's my turn. I'm a player, I'm a Tomb Raider, and I don't have very many dice, but the mummy is very close to another player. I'll just go ahead and reset those, unlock all those dice, give the mummy a free turn, because most likely the mummy won't catch me. They might catch another Tomb Raider, right? Someone else. And while that does bring the mummy closer to victory, it also pushes that player back a little bit, so I'm a little more likely to win, right? The designer really found nice ways of forcing players to work together in a way, but create motivations to kind of get each other, right? Like at the beginning of the game, you're going to see a lot of that, of what I'm talking about, right? Which is the players kind of letting other players get caught, maybe even helping the player get caught by resetting the dice, giving the mummy lots of extra movement. And that's good at the beginning, because you're pulling the other players back, which might be to your advantage, right? It's not a cooperative game. There's only one winner in the end. And it's either the mummy or it's going to be one Tomb Raider. So if you're a Tomb Raider, you actually want the mummy to catch the other players. But obviously you don't want the mummy to catch them too much, right? So at the beginning of the game, the first half of the game, you're probably going to let the mummy catch, your opponents as much as possible. And the mummy's catching people left, right, and center. But of course, the mummy wins if they get a certain number of catches. This is the way it usually plays out, or should play out. So the first half of the game, the players are working kind of against each other, right? They're letting the mummy get strong if they're in a safe place, because they're hoping the mummy will catch their opponents. But in the second half of the game, the mummy would get kind of closer to victory because they've caught a lot of people. They only need to catch a few people more, and then they win. So then the players' motivations change, and now they don't want the mummy to catch anybody, right? And you're kind of pulled, as a Tomb Raider player, you're kind of pulled left and right in that sense. And do I go for that artifact, or do I hang back and hide and hope the mummy doesn't catch me, right? It's just brilliant how it can be just a simple game, simple rules, and just create that sort of the interaction by just having the different motivations for people. And I would argue that it really captures, in a really simple way, that feeling of being chased, right? Of a mindless monster. The monster doesn't know where you are and it's running, and maybe you're hiding, you're hoping the monster doesn't catch you, right? So that's why I picked this game, because Halloween's coming up, and next week's will be a completely different game, but also with a little bit of a horror theme. Obviously, it's not very scary. Little kids won't have a problem with this, with the content. One thing I want to say is that it's a little bit easy for the mummy player to cheat. Not necessarily on purpose. So each player, as they're moving their piece on their side of the board, they're not lifting it up, right? Even if they are lifting it up, but usually they're dragging it along. But anyway, it's making a sound. And so the mummy player, even if they're not really paying attention, they can kind of hear where the player is. So what I've done, or what my family and other people I've played it with has done, is that all the players would kind of just all touch with their fingernails, just all touch the board at the same time the player is moving, so you can't tell exactly where the sound is coming from. But if you try the game, you may want to ignore that part a little bit, because the sound can actually lean into the theme a little bit. The mummy might hear where you are, but they might not know exactly which space they are, right? Unless they're watching your hand move. So I would argue the mummy probably wants to close their eyes. But in terms of hearing, that can lean into the theme a little bit, right? It's like, oh, I hear them. Somebody's over at the over by the yellow artifacts. Don't know exactly where, so I'm going to head over there, right? And that can totally just lean into the theme. So, it can be a problem if you really care about fairness, but you could also do the opposite and lean into it. It's a pretty large player range. It ranges from 2 to 5 players. The 2-player is basically a 3-player game, but 1 player controls 2 Tomb Raiders, which works fine, but because they're cooperating perfectly, it gives them a little bit of advantage. So I think in the rules, the mummy player actually doesn't have to catch them quite as many times. So it works pretty well with all the players, probably with 4 being the sweet spot, I would say. But you can play with other player ranges. It's not bad, really, at any player count. I want to talk a little bit about the different versions. I don't know much about the Chinese version. I just saw the box cover. I haven't even seen the components. And there is apparently a Swedish version, which is rethemed as some detective. I don't know anything about that either. I just know about these 2 versions. In the hobby, most everyone I know prefers or wants to find the older version, the Fluch der Mumie, or even better, the English edition Pyramid. That version's a little bit hard to find. Now, this version, Pyramid of Pengqueen, is, by comparison, much easier to find. So, how do they compare? component-wise, artwork-wise, there's almost nothing to complain about this version. Yes, I kind of prefer the classical theme of the mummy and the pyramid. This one kind of goes off in this weird direction because they're penguins. The players are penguins. I understand the company is Brain Games, and Brain Games had a hit game with Ice Cool, which had these penguin characters. And so they have this game, and they got the rights to this game and released it with an Ice Cool theme. Actually, the ice theme works really well, and I think the Chinese edition also uses kind of an ice theme, because on the dice, there's numbers 1 to 4, representing how many spaces you move your piece, your pawn. There's also an arrow, and if you choose the arrow, you move in a straight line in one direction until you hit an obstacle. And so that kind of leans into the ice theme, right? You just slide all the way down the hall until you hit a wall or something. So actually the ice theme really works. It's just the penguins. Look, I get it. Brain Games had a bit of a hit with Ice Cool, and they got a really great game, and they got the rights to it, and they did a great job with the production for the most part, and the artwork is great. But they felt the need to set it within the Ice Cool universe. It's not like Ice Cool has this amazing backstory. I don't see why they felt the need to do that. Are they trying to set up the Ice Cool cinematic universe? But if you really don't care about the theme and setting, or even if you find the theme and setting kind of cute, right, then this version is completely fine. There's only one little thing that I can say, a little complaint that I can make about the production of the new version, is that the Tomb Raider pieces, the little magnets, in the new version are very, very small. So it's very possible they're easy to get lost, but they're also a little bit hard to grip. The Ravensburger edition, by comparison, they're not much bigger, but they come out a little bit more. They're rounded, they're a little bit easier to grasp. But that's basically the only real complaint I have, and it's a little complaint. The game still works fine. Artwork is marvelous. The production is basically the same. So if you are interested in this game and you don't mind the penguin theme, maybe even you prefer the penguin theme, then I do strongly recommend you check out Pyramid of Pengqueen. I'll be having the original Fluch der Mumie in my collection because I just prefer a more classic theme of mummies and Egyptian pyramids as opposed to this kind of made-up anthropomorphic penguins thing. Just personal taste, though. So that's basically it. The older version, like I said, Fluch der Mumie, or even just Pyramid, the English edition, but the Ravensburger edition is pretty hard to find now, but you shouldn't have much problem finding this Pyramid of Pengqueen if you're interested at all in the game. And I do recommend you check it out. If you're interested in like a light family game, maybe a game that's good with kids and is unique and has just something special about it, this is a recommendation from me. I think this is a charming game. Thanks for watching. Remember, older games like Pyramid of Pengqueen, Fluch der Mumie, don't stop being good just because new games come out. Take care.